Hello F1 fans, welcome back to me and welcome back to you to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with me, Vasco, not Kawata, David and Harry, and in this episode we're going to discuss the mesmerizing Brazilian Grand Prix. First, we'll kick off with the Mexican Grand Prix predictions, and after that we'll go to the really interesting topic because the weekend was really fascinating.
Okay, starting off, my predictions for the Mexican Grand Prix were horrible. I said that Williams would get double points. They were not even close. And Mercedes would get a podium. They were close. They were 4th and 5th, but yeah, 0 out of 2.
My predictions, so one of them was actually correct. Alpine points. And they got 1 point in Mexico, but they would end up getting much more in Brazil, which we'll get onto. And my other prediction was a Sergio Perez top 5. So let's move on to Kalata's predictions, which he got 1 out of 2 as well. He said that there will be a Ferrari on the podium, and actually both Ferraris were on the podium in Mexico. Great race for them. And his other prediction, which was extremely close to being true, Bottas out qualifying Stroll. In the end, Stroll qualified 14th, Bottas was 15th. It was incredibly close, but sadly, no point there. But now it's time for the Brazilian Grand Prix.
First, shout out to Carlos Sainz, really amazing win in Mexico. Now we can move to Brazilian Grand Prix, and we can start with, even before the weekend started, Kevin Magnussen was replaced due to some health issues by Oli Berman, who had a whole weekend with the Haas team. However, we saw that was not the best Haas weekend. And for practice, we saw new track surface, but the really interesting part came with the sprint qualifying session.
Yeah, sprint qualifying, we saw McLaren were really dominant there. Both Piastri and Norris locking out the front row by over 2/10 from Leclerc, Verstappen, and Sainz. Perez and Hamilton were knocked out in SQ2. Both had miserable weekends, and it really was, from the get-go, terrible for both of them. And also an interesting point, Gasly P7 showing the potential pace in Alpine. And now onto the sprint race.
The sprint race, we had like a really interesting virtual safety car situation after Nico Hülkenberg just parked next to the track. And there were only yellow flags for about 2 laps. And this was the time when McLaren could actually switch their cars, because Oscar Piastri was leading and Lando Norris was right behind. And before, like for 20 laps, they were just discussing over the team radio. Nothing happened. And then suddenly, like during this yellow flag period, McLaren just switched. And it was kind of controversial because the FIA just were really slow with the decision, and people were like, there were conspiracy theories that the FIA helped McLaren with that.
Yeah, I believe that conspiracy theory actually, because it reminded me of 2021 Abu Dhabi. It felt like they were prioritizing entertainment, and in this case a championship battle, over the actual rules and regulations of the sport. Like, this isn't the 1980s where a car just stops on track and the driver goes off and we continue with the race as if nothing has happened. Like, they in this era have been way more proactive about safety, and they did not show that there. So I thought it was very suspicious how they conveniently swapped the McLarens, and right afterwards they called the VSC. Also, Max Verstappen got a 5-second penalty due to overtaking the delta time for the VSC, which resulted in him losing P3 to Charles Leclerc.
And is there anything else that we should discuss about the sprint race? I don't think so. We saw Russell 6th, Sainz 5th, but nothing else that really...
Pierre Gasly 2 points in the Alpine.
Yeah, we saw Checo Perez get at least 1 point during the weekend, and that was all from him. As always, not hating on him, but hating on him. And for the qualifying session, that was the interesting, probably one of the most interesting parts of the weekend. The qualifying session was really long, like almost 2 hours. We saw a lot of red flags. We saw huge rain in the beginning. Everybody was wondering whether they were going to use wets, whether they were going to use intermediates. And when we saw the first, I think it was was it Piastri that first had the intermediate tires, and after that it was like a storm from everybody. They just put the intermediates, and we saw improving times, record sectors, but we saw a lot of crashes due to the track being wet and not everybody being able to take control of the car. We also saw, before we talk about the crashes, we saw something really strange with Mercedes car, and especially for Lewis Hamilton, and his car was undrivable during the qualifying session. He was complaining over the radio. Also during the race in the beginning, I think all of you saw how Lewis was just so mad about this because he couldn't do anything else, and his car just wasn't what it had to be. And we can move to the crashes because we saw a lot of crashes that shaped the final order of the qualifying session.
Yeah, there were a total of 5 crashes, and we'll start with Franco Colapinto in Q1, hitting the barriers. There were so many crashes, I honestly don't remember on what corner it happened. Oh yeah, it was on the exit of the Senna S's. Carlos Sainz as well, that was the biggest surprise, I would say, out of all of them. He kind of just touched the throttle and the car just went spinning. Lance Stroll also had a crash similar to Franco Colapinto, and there was more suspicions that happened in Q2, and once again the FIA were very slow with the red flag. Fernando Alonso at the beginning of Q3, I believe. And also the last one, which really hurt at the time, was Alex Albon, who was actually on the front row when he crashed. It was very unfortunate. And since qualifying had been moved to Sunday, and this was 3 hours before the race because quali was so long, they couldn't even repair his car in time for the race.
The least surprising of all was Lance Stroll and his crash, as he was 10th and he qualified for Q3, although his car was smashed, and the mechanics of Aston Martin did everything that they could in order to repair his car and be ready for the race. That was in like 3 hours after the crash, which was amazing job from them. Just for Lance to crash in the formation lap, that was just Lance. I have defended him in the past, but especially this year, we just don't see anything from him. And yeah, if his father wasn't the owner of Aston Martin, I don't think that he should be like close to any of the F1 seats. And people like great talents like Felipe Dragovic, who is the reserve driver now, Theo Pourchaire, and other people who should be in F1 but are not because of cases like Lance Stroll and some people that we have seen in the past. This is just, it is a bit pathetic but really sad for the fans because we don't see the best pilots, we see the ones who should be there.
I agree with this take. And another important thing to discuss about quali was the fight between Norris and Verstappen, as Norris barely got out of Q1. He was having problems. He was like in the knockout zone. He managed to. He had unfortunate timing because he was caught out by red flags and he couldn't improve his lap. That's why he ended up P12. And with the grid penalty, he actually started P17, but it was 16 because of Albon. The top 5, like at the end of quali, was crazy. It was like Norris, Russell, then Tsunoda, Ocon, and Lawson, which like from 3rd to 5th, nobody expected these people over there. It was crazy.
And that qualifying session was really promising for Lawson and Tsunoda and RB and the weekend didn't turn out as great as they hoped for. But we still saw that there is some pace there, and actually, especially with Liam Lawson, he has proven since he switched with Danny Ricciardo that he's not like a generational talent. But I think he can feel the boots of Checo Perez in Red Bull, but we can talk about that later.
So now it's time for the main race. And starting off with the podium, which I'm sure no one predicted before the start of the race. It was first Max Verstappen, second Esteban Ocon, and third Pierre Gasly. Just unbelievable podium. And we had a bunch of non-finishers, I will say. So we had two DNFs, which were Sainz and Colapinto, both crashing once again. Two drivers that did not start the race. Alex Albon didn't even make it to the grid, and Lance Stroll drove into the gravel by himself. And also, Nico Hulkenberg got disqualified, and this is the first time a black flag had been shown since Canada 2007. He got disqualified for getting assistance from marshals when going off the track and trying to rejoin. But yeah, it was a crazy result, and we can really start off with the race start and the fact that we had some aborted starts, investigations, and overall, once again, Lando Norris losing the lead into turn one yet again.
Surprise, surprise. And also, I wanted to discuss something interesting, as you mentioned that the DNF of Carlos Sainz, like the whole weekend was disastrous for him, crashing qualifying session, his whatever he did during the race, and everything. I just don't think that wet weather is his thing. But that was especially disappointing for Ferrari's hopes about the championship in constructors. But I think that worked pretty well for McLaren despite their not so good weekend.
Yeah, the problem with Sainz is that he's inconsistent. One race he wins it, like dominates, and then the next race he just bottles it, like we saw in Brazil.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people think that, Sainz shouldn't have been dropped by Ferrari, but he is not better than Charles Leclerc, for example, and like races like this show. But to be fair, he did start from the pit lane, so it was a tough task to begin with.
He's not better than Charles Leclerc, but I'm worried about the dynamic at Ferrari, and I think just the couple Leclerc and Sainz worked pretty well for them. But as we see races like Brazil, from the other hand, show us like what is the problem with Sainz, and if you want to win, and if you want to win now, which is the case with Ferrari, you have to scrutinize some of the things that you have previously believed in. But moving on to something that I think Red Bull should scrutinize, although they previously believed in, and this is Checo Perez. And I know that I talk about this every weekend, but he just continues to prove me right with, again, poor qualifying session. Yeah, it was unlucky with the red flag, but we saw his position in rainy weather wasn't that bad, and we saw that the car of Red Bull, yeah, Max Verstappen had the new component, and he's like overall we know that he's better at driving in rain, but Perez should have done better. Should have done better in the previous races. Should have done better in Brazil. Should have done better in sprint, in quali, during the race. And he just started, he spun during the first lap, and after that he was nowhere to be seen. There were crashes, there were some wet weather problems, there have been a lot of overtakes, there has been mistakes by some of the other drivers, and still Checo Perez was nowhere to be seen, and he finished 11th, which is abysmal for that race, for the car that he has, and for 5 people that didn't even finish the race. 2 of them didn't even start the race. So there are some pretty important talks that are awaiting Red Bull, Horner, Helmut Marko, and if they don't change the second driver in that seat, I'll be really disappointed as a Red Bull fan, especially when you see the qualifying session that Tsunoda and Lawson had, and after that the race result, Tsunoda was 7th, Leon Lawson was 9th, and nobody can convince me that the RB car is better, like the second RB car is better than the main Red Bull car. So Checo, I just hope that these are his last races in the Red Bull seat.
Moving on to another incident, there were many incidents, but one that I found particularly strange was the Ollie Behrman and Franco Colapinto incident. So Ollie Behrman like runs into the back of Colapinto because he gets such a great exit, and I feel like he didn't expect it, and neither one expected it. But anyways, Behrman spins and loses like 3 places, and then he gets a 10-second penalty. And I don't even think Colapinto himself realized that Behrman even touched him. Like, this is one of the strangest penalties I've seen in my life from the FIA, and they usually are strange, but this one was most bizarre one. And I think if this was like a fight for like the lead, this would have been scrutinized, but it felt like it went under the radar because it's two young drivers fighting at the back of the pack. But this is one of the strangest penalties, in my opinion, that I've ever seen in my life.
Strange decisions from the FIA throughout the whole weekend. We can say they were pretty inconsistent, and in the past few races, actually, they've been inconsistent with the battles between Lando and Max, and now all the things that happen. I think the general problem is that when there are a lot of things happening, especially during rain, when there are a lot of spinnings, when there are a lot of problems, and usually a lot of yellow and red flags and safety cars. And I think just the FIA always finds a way to mess things up.
Another thing to point out, which I've also recently seen other people talk about as well, is the fact that the FIA have different stewards every race, and they are actually a changing rotation. And I think this also plays in a part in the inconsistency because it's different people making different decisions every time. In my opinion, they should have a set group of people, the exact same ones for every single race, so that at least when they're making decisions, they will be more consistent. Whether they'll be right or wrong, like obviously they'll never get it right for sure, but at least that will allow them to be more consistent, I think, and that would be beneficial. Another incident was Oscar Piastri just absolutely yeeting Liam Lawson. He just dives it into turn one, not even like no shot he's gonna stop, and he takes out Liam Lawson. So such a shame for Liam Lawson, who had a good start as well. Like even in the tricky conditions, he was keeping it up in the top positions where he qualified, and then Piastri completely takes him out. Oscar got a penalty. Was it also 10 seconds? Yeah. It was 10 seconds. Yeah. How was Piastri's penalty the same as Behrman's? Like, someone please explain that to me. I have no idea. But Oscar, apart from his sprint quali, was generally terrible this weekend. I think he was absolutely nowhere, and in the rain, in a race like that, you should try to make progress, and he didn't do anything. And Max, it's like he let Max go. He didn't even try to defend. When at that point, it was looking really crucial for the championship, and he was just absolutely nowhere this weekend. Really disappointed with Piastri.
Yeah, it was also kind of strange that they showed a graphic outstanding penalty for his penalty, like for Oscar's. Why would they do that? I mean, they showed it for Max in Mexico, 20 seconds. Okay, it makes sense. But why do the same for 10 seconds? They could have shown it for Behrman as well. I mean, what's the point? Where's the logic? Anyway, we can move on to one of the most crucial moments of the race. And this was when George Russell and Lando Norris decided to pit early. And after they did that, it was probably like 3 laps later when Franco Colapinto had a really heavy crash. And this was when the red flag began.
So, yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So, Russell and Norris, they pit under a VSC, I believe, because of Hulkenberg. And then eventually there was a full safety car. And then Colapinto crashed under the safety car, and that brought out the red flag. Yeah.
Was it? I think it was like in green flag conditions, wasn't it? Like,
No, he was trying to catch up to the pack.
Oh. Okay.
And he crashed at the final, like the straight.
Mm-hmm.
And
it was similar to Paul di Resta.
Similar to Paul di Resta, yeah, that's how I compared it as well. But yeah, red flag was brought out, and Esteban Ocon, Max Verstappen, and Pierre Gasly were the top 3, and they hadn't pit, and this completely changed the race, and now all of a sudden they were the main contenders for the win.
And after the race restart, after the second race restart, actually, there was like first of all, Esteban Ocon was leading the pack, but Max Verstappen over to him. It was a very, very well executed overtake. It was just a joy to watch. And we saw number 2 and number 3, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, which is like super strange position to see them. And till the end of the race, they had like a super fine pace, in my opinion, especially when we talk about Alpine. And the only driver that was faster than them was actually Max Verstappen. And we saw with the restart, we saw a very strange mistake from Lando Norris. I don't know, maybe it was the rain and some problems with the tires or him not being concentrated, but Lando just even if he had some championship hopes, that was the moment when he threw them away.
I absolutely agree, and Alpines were very impressive because the cars behind them were George Russell, Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, like front runners, and they couldn't even like attempt. Like George Russell, like he caught up a little bit, but nowhere near making a move.
Which in no single moment, like George Russell was in like less than a second to Pierre Gasly, which just showed like the great work during this weekend from Alpine, and with a bit of luck, they just gained a lot of positions in the Constructors' Championship.
We can move on with strange spin by Ollie Behrman. It was another one of the like moments which just highlighted Haas' awful weekend.
Yeah, he spun and hit the wall, and I thought he was going to be out of the race, but he continued. And he still finished like ahead of both Saubers and Fernando Alonso.
Oh yeah, Alonso had a horrible race as well. He was also complaining on the radio that his back hurt because the car was like bouncing so much. It was horrible.
Because of carrying the whole team.
In general, a lot of people complained about the new track surface, by the way, kind of ruining Interlagos, which I hope is not a trend in future years. But yeah, overall, that was pretty much the end of the race. Right? Well, we also saw Carlos Sainz crash. We mentioned that, and Lewis Hamilton somehow managed to cling on to 1 point, even though his race was not great as well. And I found it very impressive that Liam Lawson managed to keep like Hamilton and Alonso behind, like in some great battles. Overall, also I wanted to mention about RB. They pit for wet tires, and Yuki Tsunoda was apparently 5 seconds faster than everyone else, and they called the safety car and the red flag, and that totally ruined their strategy, and they dropped down the points as a result. But that was unfortunate. Yeah. But overall, that's pretty much the race. Yeah.
We can move on to our fun rubric then, and start off with the highlight of the weekend. I'll begin, and I'll say that it was the Alpine double podium, because this is something we had not seen since 2006, and it was something memorable, I would say.
For me, the highlight was the rain during the whole weekend. When it rains, the race is fun, and that was like a prime example of a very memorable race that is going to stay in the history of F1 as really entertaining race because of the rain, and because when it rains, actually the drivers, they change their style, and there are a lot of differences in how the teams approach the situation, and this is just very fun to watch because we usually receive like 1, 2, 3 rainy races during the season at best, and always they're like super memorable.
Yeah, on top of your memorable take, I think just the whole weekend was the highlight of the weekend, actually. It was just every session I found very interesting. I mean, obviously there was the championship battle, but qualifying, this was one of the craziest qualifyings I've ever watched in my life. And yeah, I think this race will go down as an all-time classic, and I can say I thoroughly enjoyed it. But at the end of the day, this is Interlagos, we love Interlagos, and I wish this was the season finale still, but even though it's not, I'm glad it's on the calendar, and I'm glad that we have races like these.
It's just that Brazil never disappoints. Let's move to the surprise and disappointments of the weekend. And for me, and I think for everybody else, the surprise of the weekend was Max Verstappen. His drive was genius, insane, and I think we have to give this one to him. That was just his weekend, and everybody else was just one or a few steps behind him. And for me, another thing that was the disappointment, let's call it the disappointment of the weekend, that was Lando Norris, because of his mistakes, because he was on a position when he's fighting for the championship, he's on pole position, and his main contender starts 17th, and there are a lot of strange events happening, but still you have to deal with that and still find a way to win the race, or at least get as many points as possible. And with the mistake he made, that was like the top of his disappointing weekend. And also, just to say for Haas that it was very disappointing weekend for them, because some of the things they couldn't control them, but the thing that Alpine overtook them in the championship only with one race, that must have hurt.
Absolutely. My surprises and disappointments. I mean, surprise, Max Verstappen winning from 17th, even though, like, maybe last year I wouldn't be surprised that this happened. But considering the circumstances, it was incredible. And actually, when you were talking about how, Norris is starting first, Verstappen is starting 17th, really reminds me of Germany 2018. Sebastian Vettel, pole position, Lewis Hamilton starting way down the order, and in the end of the day, it was the complete opposite result, and this race really reminded me of that. Lando Norris proved not ready to win a title. Next year, I'm sure he'll have a stronger challenge, but yeah, to win a championship, you have to be a rain master as well, and when you're facing Max Verstappen, you have to be near perfect, especially in the rain, as I consider him the best of all time in the rain.
Absolutely, I agree. I can't argue with that, honestly. Even though Hamilton has had some great performances, in the rain, Max is the best. And my disappointment is Williams, because they had 3 crashes on Sunday only, like 2 in qualifying and 1 in the race. They didn't start with 1 car in the race. I mean, considering Franco Colapinto's performances recently, I think all of us expected him to get some points in Brazil, but unfortunately, Williams really disappointed.
Moving on to our predictions for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, which is in quite a while, but still. Cody, you can start.
Okay, so my first prediction, it may be a strange one, but it's that Aston Martin will get double points. Considering their Brazil weekend, I know it may sound bold, but I'll stick to it. Let's see, maybe Lance Stroll will have an amazing race. And the other one is that there will be no McLaren on the podium, because I expect Ferrari to be strong in Las Vegas, and I also think that Max will pull off another great performance. So
mine are a bit strange, a bit different, but I wanted to be outside of the box, and that is why my prediction is that Alpine, after their double podium, a lot of points gotten, on the next weekend they're not going to take any points, and especially they're going to have 1 DNF. And if I have to guess who of the drivers it would be, that would be Esteban Ocon. It is just that when something really good happens in Alpine, it is followed by something disastrous, and I think that trend is going to continue. And my second prediction is that the new Williams, so-called Kick Sauber team, are going to get their first points during the season. I don't know how, they probably don't know too, but this is going to happen, I'm telling you.
I would call them the new HRT, but still, that's a good comparison as well. My predictions, my first one, Max Verstappen wins the championship. To win it, he needs to make sure Lando doesn't outscore him by more than 2 points, which, I mean, based on the normal pace, you would think Lando has that in the bag, but I think Max will be determined to get the job done in Vegas. And my second prediction is that Charles Leclerc will win the race. He was very good around here last year, and even though Ferrari had kind of an off weekend, even though I think Charles drove a commendable P5 in Brazil, I think that this track will really suit them, and he will start making a challenge at the Constructors' Championship and for second in the drivers.
You mentioned Verstappen is going to win the title in Las Vegas, but do you think that race is going to crush like the thoughts, the mind of Lando Norris, because of all the comments, because of his mistake, because of the lost championship at that point? Do you think that this is going to affect him like in a really negative way.
I think Lando, I mean, based on his post-race interviews, he's really lost his mind at the moment. And I mean, understandable in some way, but yeah, I think he'll write off this season. I mean, his last few races, they might not be the best, or maybe he has no pressure now, no championship fight, so he could perform well. But I think after an off season and a lot of, pondering over this season, he'll move on from it, and I think he'll be much more prepared. I think this season was really important for Lando in terms of getting some experience in what a championship battle could look like and what he can take from it to go into the next season, which I think will be a much greater shot for him.
Yep, I absolutely agree with what both of you said. And if there is nothing else, I think we can wrap up. So this is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us on AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.